Loading the Moochers. Kent Ranch. Morning. Day 1. Ashley watched nonplussed as all of the cows and horses got loaded into trailers. The humans were obviously upset about something, but she couldn't tell what. Ashley wondered if the cows had misbehaved, so they had to go to school early this year. That didn't make any sense to Ashley because these cows were obviously not old enough to go to school. Sometimes other chickens and roosters went to school, but never Ashley. She could get away from the farmers, and eventually they gave up trying to get her to go to school. Ashley figured it must be a pretty cool place because none of the animals ever came back from it. Ashley didn't need to go to that school, though. She was already plenty smart. She looked around, and there were no more cows or horses that hadn't been loaded. Ashley squinted and looked sideways, then turned her neck around to look at her own coop of moron step-siblings. Ashley turned back around and saw that the humans were piling into their trucks with their beloved counterparts. One of the farmer people was pointing towards the chicken coop, which made Ashley feel suddenly very self-conscious. She wondered if she was in trouble, but nobody paid attention to their attempted directing. She felt like she should recognize the person who was pointing at her. She racked her little chicken brain trying to remember. It seemed to elicit a memory of one of the little human beings bringing her extra snacks and treats and being nice to her. A while ago. Maybe a longer while ago. It had made the other chickens more jealous, but Ashley didn't mind. She never felt specifically better than the other chickens, but they certainly were always trying to make her feel worse. Ashley flapped her wings as hard as she could, and then she jumped on the roof in order to get closer to the humans disembarking. She didn't quite make it and had to grab on with her beak and throw a leg up and roll into the gutter. It wasn't graceful or flattering, but she managed to get on the roof of their house. No worse for wear. With a spring in her step, she jumped into a pose like she meant to do all of that. She'd got out of the coop before, but never this far, this high, although she saw the rooster out here all the time. Since the rooster came up here, it couldn't be that dangerous, and they didn't get along, though. Ashley had decided a long time ago that this rooster wasn't her type. He was a bully, and wouldn't allow any other more interesting or attractive roosters to be around. Several other roosters had to leave because of his poor attitude. She would never forget this because there had been a rooster she was moderately fond of. Unfortunately, the two roosters didn't get along, and her rooster buddy had to go to rooster school, and that was that. Never saw them again. Must have graduated. So anyway, Ashley made her way to the top of the roof and over to the side to see the rooster sitting there watching the spectacle. She wasn't intimidated by him, but he called her Fireball to be mean. Ashley wasn't sure whether she liked the name, but she owned it anyway. If she wanted to, she could really put the hurt on him. The fight would be a bad trade, but she didn't care. She wasn't going to let anyone decide her place in life but her. Hey, Ashley, the rooster corrected himself. He shuffled nervously a bit. Then when there was no recourse came, he straightened up to look official. I'm going with them, is all Ashley said, the tone in her voice dignified as if her mind was quite made up. The rooster seemed to ponder this and then readjusted his posture on the roof. He refused to respond. You weren't invited anyway, Ashley seethed to the rooster. It was a repeat of the phrase he had used to the other roosters and to her when they arrived at the coop and tried to get acquainted. As he was trying to formulate some kind of asshole-ish retort, she got a running start and flap leaped off the roof. She finally got some fairly good air, but crashed and tumbled into the back of one of the pickups hauling moochers. The dog was in the back of the truck, which startled Ashley. He was the house dog, though. The sheepdog was probably with the sheep or something. The house dog wasn't too smart. All he said was, going? And then shoved his huge nose in Ashley's face. Ashley fluffed out and put out her wings to make herself look huge. The dog raised an eyebrow and said, truck. Ashley thought, no kidding, this is a truck, you stupid dog, and then responded, why do dogs have, zero vocabulary? The dog responded, cart, and side nodded to the back where the cows were. Ashley already knew that it was a cart and thought to herself, since she was tiny and didn't weigh much, she would go back to the cart. The truck lurched to forward momentum and turned an arc to get out of the driveway. That put her in line of sight with a small entrance into the cart. Ashley carefully timed her jump flapping, and off she went. She landed her landing perfectly this time, which is good, because she didn't want to get trampled by the cows. The moochers were as passive as ever, but they did have to shuffle around a bit to make sure they didn't fall over as the truck carefully drove. They were mooing about a few different things, continuing with their morning gossip as if nothing unusual was going on. Everything was being discussed and repeated in order of occurrence, so that they were still going over what happened last night. It rained over and over. They were repeating that it rained. They hadn't gotten to the current events yet. It took a while. Ashley carefully turned to see the farm as they drove off. She saw the arrogant bully rooster overseeing his farm and saw the stupid chickens running around like morons. Ashley thought that the farmer folk were probably going to come back for the chickens. She looked over and saw that another group was getting the sheep with the help of the sheepdog. She looked down at the ground and recalled noting that the puddles looked bigger than usual. With that, she hopped onto the back of a cow and cuddled up, the cows repeating "rain" over and over again. One of the cows was saying the word slightly different, and she couldn't quite make it out. Sounded like maybe flood. Brief road trip, late morning, day 1. Ashley sat quite satisfied with herself on a moocher as they drove to wherever it was they were going. The vehicle had to stop several times, and the men with guns exchanged quick conversations with other men as they passed through. The people at these roadblocks, or whatever they were, looked inside and saw the animals and shined in the flashlights and then let the vehicles go. Some of the guys looked at Ashley but didn't seem fazed by the misplaced barnyard creature. She would blink at them and they'd blink at her and shrug. It was fine. The most important thing to the people seemed to be that they weren't people hiding inside and that everyone's safe. Those were all farm animals, though, and so they quickly got moved towards their destination. Ashley looked out from time to time and saw that there were many farms and many farm animals all headed in the same direction. Ashley wondered where they were going. She wondered what could possibly fit all of them and why all the farm equipment was being left behind. That made her feel very proud and worthy that she was getting saved. But then she remembered that the chicken coop was sort of the last on the list. Ashley remembered that she was taught by her mom when she was just a hatchling, though. Always survive no matter what life throws at you. Ashley had decided at that moment it was her duty as a chicken to survive and make it to the next day. She couldn't figure out why none of the other chickens had the same sentiment, but she thought that they were all idiots and must have been raised by idiot parents. Mediocrity breeds mediocrity, she thought. Massive operation, train yard morning, day 1. The vehicle bumped and splashed along until eventually they reached a huge yard. It was bigger than anything Ashley had ever seen. The yard had a train with hundreds of cars on it, all of varying shapes and configurations. The trailer that Ashley was in stopped, and she bounded out to get a better look. In the background, she could hear the cows nearly getting caught up with their event dialogue. They were now at the part regarding how they were getting herded into trailers to go somewhere. From Ashley's new perch, she could see that this was a massive effort. Large farm equipment was being loaded onto the front, and cows and horses in the middle, and sheep at the end. She was relieved to see that there existed specialized trucks chock full of chickens, but didn't notice any of her own stupid coop mates in them. Who waits to get saved? Ashley thought to herself, then fluttered off to the train to watch the loading process. She stayed up high so she wouldn't get rustled up by all the hustle and bustle on the ground. Everyone was moving very urgently. Ashley walked over to the front and watched the equipment getting moved in. There were dozers and big shovel machines. Ashley thought those were neat and decided that was the area she wanted to stay in. There was still some time, though, and she strutted down the train to see what was all getting loaded. 2 by 2, there were cows and horses and donkeys and bulls. She saw some llamas, 2 pachyderms, and some emus, and kept going to see sheepdogs helping stuff the sheep into carts. Ashley hopped along the carts one by one as she counted. She estimated 100, and that wasn't even close. There were probably closer to 200 carts by the time she hopped down them all. She got to the end, and there were some cabooses with staff piling in as much gear as they could. There was a clearing in the torrent of rainfall, and Ashley focused her eyes and looked onward up the road to the dam.